Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wisdom of the Soul class presented by the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. I'm Michael Benner. Happy as always to be here. I do this every week, mostly because I love it, not because I have to. And it's all free for you and your friends. And if you're unable to be with us live any given Sunday morning at 11 California time, this whole video is posted on YouTube as the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, and we also have a podcast by the same name. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Recently, I've received some donations, and though this is free, we do have internet costs. So I just want to acknowledge uh, how much I appreciate that, and the fact that some of you feel like kicking a few bucks every once in a while. That really means a lot to me. And um, there's a little note about it at the bottom of the newsletter each week. Today we're going to talk about consciousness. The word consciousness, is complex. It has many, many meanings beyond, I guess, the first and most obvious. Are you conscious or unconscious? Are you awake, alert, responsive to your environment, or are you unconscious and not responding or responding in very minimal ways to your environment? I feel like it's important to remember that even when we're unconscious, as in sleep, that if the alarm clock goes off or a fire engine goes by your house, you probably wake up. So some part of you obviously remains conscious. And that leads to the whole idea of consciousness, which is always present. And many would say from birth to death, there is always a level of consciousness, whether we're conscious or unconscious. But I would argue that in the great mystical and metaphysical traditions, there is no birth or death, that consciousness is infinite and eternal. And primarily what I want to talk about is the unconscious, or commonly called the subconscious, and its relationship to the conscious mind. But time permitting, we'll go to this idea of consciousness with a capital C, or awareness with a capital A, the root of being, the closest we can come to a true identity of who and what we are as energy beings or spiritual beings, beings of light and love. It's interesting. Eastern religions talk about consciousness all the time. In the Western religions, the Abrahamic religions, it's referred to as love. And it's confusing because most of us think of love as an emotion. But undifferentiated consciousness versus differentiated or individual consciousness is something that, again, time permitting, we'll get to near the end of the class today. Primarily, I want to talk about what does it mean to consciously access the unconscious or subconscious mind, and what is the preconscious. There is something known as preconsciousness. And this is not complicated. It's pretty straightforward and simple, but it's valuable. It really helps a lot when you want to learn and understand and remember uh, how to be more conscious of that which is usually left to the unconscious or subconscious. Is a very valuable skill. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. That's what we'll talk about today. Let's begin, as we always do, with an opening meditation. Oh, and I also want to make a brief announcement, a little bit of sadness, but a bit of a tribute. I I feel compelled to say something about the passing last week of a friend of mine and someone who I'm sure many of you know, and that's Roy of Hollywood on KPFK, Roy Tuckman. I first met Roy in the early 80s when I was at KLOS, and many of Roy's callers were telling him Roy did the overnight show for 50 years on KPFK. Many of his callers were telling him about my show on KLOS. And somehow we got hooked up. Somebody, I don't remember who called who, but I felt an immediate affinity with this guy. And his appearance can be a little intimidating. He's like Chewbacca. He was like 6'1" or 6'2", broad-shouldered, huge fuzzy beard, looked like a biker and somebody you wouldn't want to mess with. But in fact, he was just a very gentle being and a compassionate and kind-hearted social activist, more devoted to radio and bringing progressive news and information and entertainment, more devoted to that than anybody I've ever met in my life. He's sacrificed. I mean, you don't get paid much at KPFK. Most people don't get paid at all. I never took a nickel. But because he was on all night, 5 nights a week, he did receive a small salary and figured out a way to live on it. So it's like almost like a missionary, a radio missionary. And maybe best known for running the Alan Watts tapes every Thursday night was Consciousness Night. And so he felt strongly about running the Alan Watts tapes, Jack Kerouac tapes, and other material like that which we talk about in this class. Well, Roy was 84 years old, and he died a week ago. And I talked to his widow yesterday. I just learned about it, and we're going to try and hook up again. She's going to call Doreen when the dust settles. But just by way of tribute, first of all, I'm sure many of you know Roy of Hollywood, and I think you should know that he's passed. And if you Google, no, not Google, if you go to YouTube and search for Roy Tuckman, Elliot Mintz, those two names, Elliot Mintz was another radio guy that I've worked with at KPFK and ABC Radio. Actually, Elliot did the KLOS talk show in the 70s, which is how he met John Lennon. He was very close to John and Yoko. But that's another story. There is a video, 10-part video, and the 10th part, this was filmed 8 years ago, is Roy talking about death. Elliot interviewing Roy about his ultimate demise and about death. And he talks about encountering death when he was 15 and his 18-year-old brother died. And what he learned about death from psychedelic experiences, LSD and mescaline and peyote and psilocybin. And it's a fascinating interview and quite prophetic. I mean, we all die. Maybe it's not prophetic, but it certainly is relevant. So I miss him already. He was just a heroic guy and so inspiring, and I've always had so much admiration for him that I wanted to share that in class today. Because again, I'm sure many of you know who Roy is and have listened to the Alan Watts tapes and the other programming that he would do. So with that, Let's do our opening meditation. Get comfortable in your chairs or your sofa or bed or meditation pillow, and assume the position. Relaxed, sitting upright, nicely balanced and centered. And just take stock in how it feels to balance yourself and to begin to allow yourself to settle in. I often think of a bowl of muddy water that sits long enough and becomes clear because the sediment falls out of the water slowly. I bring that to mind often when I first meditate and just wait for the dust to settle. Just begin relaxing without any effort at all. Kind of a conscious letting go of purpose and activity and whatever it is that motivates our busyness. Feel the letting go. If that in and of itself creates anxiety, remind yourself you can have it back later. You're just going to take a few minutes to explore being very still and quiet and calm and peaceful, at ease. And bring your awareness to your breath with the bottom of your nose. And begin to watch your body breathing itself, identifying as the one who watches. Tell yourself each time you begin to meditate, I am not the breather, except when my breathing is deliberate and purposeful. And so do that. Take 2 or 3 nice, slow, deep breaths and be the one who breathes. Be the breather. As you pull in strength on your inhale through the nose, hold for just a beat, and exhale just as slowly through the nose or the mouth, beyond where you'd normally stop, all the way out. Wait for a beat and then do it again, slowing it all down. And feel the letting go of muscular tension as you exhale, pulling in power and strength on the inhalation. You feel the letting go as you exhale. Just one more big, slow, deep breath. Feel the power coming in and the letting go as you exhale. And in that case, you are the breather. But when you begin to breathe normally, do that now. Feel a letting go, a turning it over to autopilot, your involuntary breathing, so-called. Feel the letting go of control, of needing to initiate a breath or manage your breathing. or do anything other than simply observe your body breathing itself. Identify this is an in-breath, this is an out-breath. The small child can do that. There's no need to judge or compare or be concerned, for there is no wrong way to breathe, no correct or better way to breathe. The body has an inherent intelligence, and it knows what it needs. This innate intelligence will determine the period or frequency of the breathing, the depth of the breath, the muscles in your diaphragm that control the breathing itself. Which in time you find progressing from a back and forth and in and out to a feeling of around and around. Begin to become aware of the cycle, the cyclic nature of your body breathing itself, all by itself. Like riding a bicycle, your legs go up and down, but your feet go around and around and around. And this is the nature of all things. Everything is energy. Everything vibrates. Everything has its frequency and its amplitude. It's coming and going. It's seasons and phases and cycles. Anticipate the tendency of the mind to want to think. It's what the mind does. It's why meditation is a practice, a training, really. And so expect to be pulled off. And you may not even be aware of it, especially without the benefit of my narrative When you do a breath watching exercise like this, so-called insight meditation or vipassana, you will find yourself thinking, wondering about things, much of it negative and worrisome. It's a familiar state. And when you find that your mind has drifted, that you have been distracted, say to yourself, of course. Don't admonish yourself. Say, well, of course. And with a little smile, let that go. It's easy to recognize it's of no real consequence. Let it go. And gently bring your awareness back to observing your body breathing itself. With great curiosity and interest, and even fascination. That in spite of our tendency to micromanage, so much of life is handled for us. That we are free to be the witness, the non-judgmental observer. For this is awakening. This is expanded awareness. This elevated perspective is higher consciousness. For as we learn to observe our body breathing itself and release the illusion that we are somehow responsible for breathing, we can observe our thoughts and feelings with the same degree of non-attachment and let go and be the awareness of your thinking. Imagine. Those intrusive, task unrelated thoughts, the worry, the apprehension, the fears of inadequacy, you understand that they are products of an unconscious mind. But as the conscious self, you need not pursue them. When our thoughts are applied to a particular task, reading, writing, making decisions, solving problems, setting goals, then you are the thinker. But when you let go of that, and you are idle, is padding around the house, organizing, doing the dishes, preparing a meal, just your little daily life and affairs. And Your thoughts are not really necessary. The mind continues to generate ideas, and we call it thinking. But it's not deliberate and it's not purposeful thinking. These are intrusive thoughts. You need not take ownership, whether they're positive or negative. They bubble up from the unconscious. And if you like a particular thought train, you can embrace it. But if it's filled with nonsense, let it go. You don't have to believe everything that occurs to you, and you don't even have to call it a thought. If you didn't deliberately generate it through a consideration or contemplation, it's just noise. Why take ownership of it? Be instead the awareness of it and choose what to do with it. So to our emotional feelings. Reflect on the difference between he or she made me angry and I am the awareness that recognizes anger on the horizon coming toward me. You see the difference? With this type of practice, this type of meditation, we become aware of our feelings before they get all over us. Anger, for example, occurs as the understanding that you're beginning to become irritated and frustrated. Maybe you should take a look at it before it becomes full-blown anger. And we react reflexively and say or do something we almost immediately regret. Imagine seeing that emotion on the horizon, in the distance, coming toward you a mile away. All the time that you have to understand it from an elevated perspective. Our feelings, our thoughts, our speech and behavior. You get to consider the consequences of what you say and do before you say it and before you do it. Look at the wisdom in being that self-aware. Not only do we come to understand ourselves better, but we become leaders who can manage our relationships, our interpersonal social relationships. You think twice and maybe a third time before you engage, contradict, disagree. act reflexively out of anger or fear. Your whole life changes when you become calm, safe, relaxed, and cultivate that elevated perspective. I'm not the thinker. I am my awareness of my thoughts. I am not a victim of feelings that are being done to me by others. I am the awareness of how I feel, emotionally and physically for that matter. And I can substitute even-tempered, well-reasoned speech and behavior for knee-jerk reactions. And as I understand myself better, I can empathize and have compassion for others, recognize motives that even they are unaware of, and adjust and account for it in the way I manage others. Not manipulate, but manage, influence for the greater good of all. Help others to feel safe and calm, unthreatened by your presence. To be the awareness of our thoughts, our emotions, our behavior, our speech, our health, our relationships with others, and then finally, to be aware of awareness itself. To be aware of being aware is to notice what you notice and awaken. And so the puppet cuts the strings and becomes a real boy. A process, not a place, not a destination, but an unfoldment of consciousness. And so when you do a meditation like this without benefit of a narrator, bring some of this with you into your explorations of what it means to be aware, increasingly self-aware, even more aware, noticing what you notice as you begin to realize you are awareness itself. And you look around at a whole new world. Colors like you've never seen them before. a vitality that appears all but psychedelic. An energy, a loving spirit that embraces us, supports us, lifts us up, redeems our fears, brings light to the shadows, warmth to the cold, harmony and unity to the feelings of alienation, abandonment, and even betrayal. Never alone, you're never alone. Form the intention to return to the waking state together. 2, feel a gentle drifting up, like waking or rising in the morning. And 3, eyes open now, wide awake, back in the room. Open your eyes, wide awake, back in the room, feeling better than before, and take a big breath. Feel the letting go as you relax. Move around a little bit, maybe stretch. Stomp your feet gently. Get back in your body. Feeling better than before. Welcome back. Thank you for that. Alrighty. So let's talk about, well, I think a place to begin is this word subconscious, because we hear about the subconscious mind all the time. And it's not a clinical term. There's really no such thing as the subconscious. It really came out of the New Thought movement of the early 19th century. The idea of a subconscious mind, sub meaning underneath or submerged. But it's basically a synonym for the unconscious. So there's no distinction really between the unconscious and the subconscious. It's just that if you talk to a psychologist or psychiatrist or most social workers who are trained in interpersonal counseling, and they're more likely to talk about the unconscious. And if they use the word subconscious, it's just a figure of speech. We're talking about the unconscious. But then there's the conscious mind. Now, this is where our discussion this morning needs to begin, with the understanding that the conscious and the unconscious are not two minds. There's only one mind. Now, if we talk about the one mind in absolute terms, that's the universe, that's the Godhead, that's the first cause, the prime mover, the absolute, the source of all. That would be the one mind. Sometimes referred to as the one life or the one heart. But consciousness, the mind, becomes differentiated and individuated into individuals. And so each of us shares an aspect or a segment of the one cosmic mind. And so we have one persona mind, jiva nature, ego nature. There's one unconscious mind, the tip of which, 10% of which, roughly speaking, because we're not sure what 100% is, is conscious. It's very much like an iceberg. That's the allegory that's used all the time. Icebergs may look enormous as you approach them, but it's only 10% of the story. The other 90% of the iceberg is submerged and invisible. And so it is with the mind. We have, as individuals, a single unified mind that is mostly unconscious. And then a little bit of it in the morning when you wake up becomes conscious. And then as we go to sleep becomes unconscious. But even then, as I suggested at the top of the class today, it's not a complete unconsciousness, like a deep coma, for example. Because if somebody rang a bell or shot a gun, there was a loud noise, a person would wake up from their unconsciousness. Not true in a coma, for example, but in natural sleep. And there are stages of sleep. How deep? There's deep non-dream sleep. A year ago, we did a class on brainwaves, the delta brainwaves, 0 to 4 cycles, deep non-dream sleep. And then theta is REM state, where we experience hypnagogic imagery, but we're usually unconscious. That's 4 to 7 cycles. We can go there with consciousness, which is part of the whole point of today's class, is how do we get greater conscious access to the unconscious mind. So theta is a state where we dream at night, and maybe you have a lucid dream and you're aware of the dream while you're having it, but most likely it's only when you wake up that you remember a dream or dreams. That happens in theta. Above that is alpha. And alpha is like 8 to 12 cycles. And this is mild relaxation, a gentle focus. We can think of it as concentration, but so many people that believe concentration is an effort that they may not know true concentration. If you look at children playing on the floor with their dolls or their trucks or their blocks or their board games, the whole rest of the world falls away. They're so focused in on what they're doing. Or a child outside on the sidewalk, fixated on the ants and the roly-polies, and sitting there for hours, just so focused, and the rest of the world just falls away. That's alpha. It's a gentle state of natural focus and concentration, but you're awake and alert and aware. And then there's beta, which is anything above 12, all the way up to the high 30s, 40 cycles per second. And this is the state of external stimulation, wide awake, alert, focused out through your physical senses. And the more stimulated that we are, the more scattered our attention. And also the greater the tendency to think in binary terms and false dichotomies. You're more creative, have more insight and understanding and a better memory in alpha, in that relaxed, focused state of concentration and expanded awareness. The wide awake is not better in terms of creativity or comprehension or understanding. The more stimulated we are, the more scattered our attention. And again, there's also a tendency to think in either-or terms, all or nothing. You see this a lot in the way news is approached. Anytime people get scared, they're going to go to either-or. So if your goal is to use fear to control and manipulate people, you're going to do that with the either-or, all-or-nothing arguments. Like the right could not possibly say anything positive about Donald Trump. I'm sorry, I misspoke. That was Freudian. About Joe Biden, right? They couldn't even say they just couldn't find anything nice to say. And it's very easy to get caught up, on the other hand, in talking about Trump's excesses, or excesses rather. I'm full of Freudian slips today. Trump's excesses. I suppose we could find something nice to say about him, but it's difficult. It's just that we lose that whole middle ground. We've talked a lot about that in the past. And so one of the benefits of relaxing, managing stress, letting go of fear and anxiety is to come back to this middle ground where you're not asleep, so you're more aware, but you're also not in these high beta states where your attention is all over the place. And you want to tune the instrument right in the middle. That's where there is the greatest awareness. So the relationship of the conscious to the unconscious is very much like an iceberg. And what I want you to understand, if nothing else, is that there's a kind of a valve between the two. Now, I'm not talking about left brain, right brain. I'm not talking about the brain at all when we discuss the mind. The mind is not a physical organ. The mind is mental, emotional, and physical, and spiritual for that matter. The mind is everything. It's not just in your head. The mind, think of the mind as a egg-shaped energy field all around you. When I ask you to move your awareness to the bottom of your nose, for example, people do that without thinking twice about the ability to move your awareness. Or if we do, as we have in the past, these progressive muscular relaxation exercises, and I say, well, begin by moving your awareness to your feet and create and sense a letting go in your feet. And you go, okay, and you move your awareness to your feet. How do you do that? Right? How do you know you're hungry? There's something, how do you know you need to use the restroom? There is a sensation in your body that comes into your awareness. And conversely, if you move your awareness around, you can manage these things. Like if you're really hungry, but there's no food available right now, you can move your awareness to the area that feels the hunger, probably your belly, and breathe into it. Send a couple of breaths into that hungry tummy, and you'll find those sensations of hunger disappear. They just vaporize. They'll return if you don't feed yourself because you need the food. But in the short term, you can breathe them away with your awareness and some breath. It's quite remarkable. In my book, Fearless Intelligence, I talk about the selective nature of awareness. How you could listen to music. A drummer who listens to music is always listening to the drums, and he or she may hear the other, well, obviously they will hear the other instruments in the song, the lyrics, the guitar player, the bass, the keyboards, the strings, the horns, whatever. But he's listening to the drummer, she's listening to the drummer, and the bass player would tend to want to listen to the bass line. You don't want to go to movies with people in the film industry because they have a hard time enjoying the movie. The sound designer is listening critically to the music and the Foley and the sound effects, and the lighting guy is irritated by the bad lighting here and the shadows over there. They're no fun to go to the movies with because they have such focused awareness on their areas of interest. You can go into a room where there's a dozen conversations happening among 80 or 100 people, and without moving, you can shift your attention from one conversation to another. not to the exclusion of all the other sounds and noises. You can hear the din, everybody in the room speaking, but you also have the ability, without moving a muscle, to focus your attention on this conversation. Perhaps aided by your eyes. You allow your eyes to help you. And then you look over here and see another group. You can tune your concentration, your awareness, your selective awareness to that conversation, pretty much to the exclusion of the others. Isn't this fascinating that we're able to do this? I think it's just a mind-blowing ability, again, but we don't notice what we notice. We don't notice that we notice. We're just not that aware. Nobody's taught us awareness. School boards and teachers beat their heads against the wall trying to get kids to concentrate, try harder, concentrate. It's the worst thing you can do. Take a breath, relax, be fascinated. Expand your awareness, develop your awareness. Then you have a better understanding of concentration. So let's go back to this idea that even though mind is a concept having nothing to do with the brain or any physical organ, it's just an abstract concept. Imagine that there is a valve, like a faucet, between the conscious and the unconscious. And the more stimulated, the higher your brain waves, the more stimulated you are by externals or internal stress and anxiety, the tighter and more constricted this valve is. Which means communication between the conscious and the unconscious is restricted. When you relax deliberately and purposefully, that valve dilates, it opens, and communication between the conscious and the unconscious improves. There's less resistance. In other words, relaxation, slow, deep breathing, meditation, contemplation, using stress management to expand awareness, opens this filter, this valve, and the conscious mind now has greater access to the unconscious. And yet it's a two-way street. So let's talk about the benefits of this. Let's start with memory. We all know the tip of the tongue phenomena, where you attempt to recall something, and again, you have this internal sensation that we call tip of the tongue. Oh, it's right here. Hold on. It's so close I can taste it. Give me a second. It's, and the harder you try, the less likely you are to remember it. You see why? Because the effort of trying to do something shuts down the valve. So you can feel it running away. It was so close, and now the harder you try to recall it, the more it eludes you. Damn. So how do you handle a situation like that? You make the effort, you reach for it, see if you can bring it in, but it's more a letting go than a reaching. Okay, you form the intention, but let go, let it drop in. And if it doesn't, if it eludes you, don't chase it. Don't go after it. Don't make an effort to remember. Instead, say to yourself, or if you're in conversation with another, I'll remember in a minute. And then continue your conversation. Just let it go. I'll think of it in a minute. And let it go. And you know what'll happen. You know what'll happen, right? It doesn't even take a minute. Usually 20 to 30 seconds later, it just explodes into your awareness. Maybe explode is overstated. It pops into your awareness. It comes to your attention. It bubbles up out of the unconscious mind. because you let go. And so the valve dilates and there's less resistance, and the memory stored in the unconscious now becomes consciously available to you. So insight and understanding is the same thing. If you're trying to figure out a problem, how to understand any problem in your life, the harder you try to understand it, the less likely you are to understand it. But if you let go, if you're working on the computer and you're frustrated and can't figure something out, the best thing to do is stand up and walk away from the computer. Go get a glass of water, or go for a walk or something. Stretch. Come back to the computer 10 minutes later, 30 minutes later, maybe the next day. And you look at your problem and suddenly it's, oh my God, well, it was right here in front. That's easy. It was right here in front of me. Why didn't I see that? Better question is, why does it take us so long to figure out that the harder we try, the worse we do? It's like that Chinese finger lock, that woven straw finger lock. You put your fingers in and then you go to pull them out. And the harder you pull, the more tightly you're locked. That's the way the mind works. The harder you try, the worse you do. Writer's block, performance anxieties, all kinds of examples of this. The idea is to bring grace and elegance and ease and peace to the situation. And then you open that valve. There's a technical term for it. I think it's called reticular activating formation. But it's more of a neurological term than a mind term. And I don't really understand it, so maybe I shouldn't even mention it. But scientists are aware of this. It's not just hippies and hypnotists and meditators that understand this. It's pretty well studied phenomena. So any learning, any understanding, any desire for insight and enhanced comprehension is going to improve with relaxation, because we're integrating the conscious and the unconscious. With that valve open, when we relax, more information comes from the unconscious into the conscious mind. We get greater conscious awareness of the unconscious. What else is in the unconscious beside memory, learning, understanding? Well, the whole body's immune system is regulated by the unconscious mind. Again, if empiricists might say, no, Michael, it's not the mind, it's the brain that does that. All right, well, again, brain and mind are different models. Brain is a physical thing. You can hold it in your hand. The mind is an abstract concept for an energy that comes through the brain. And by the brain, it also comes through the heart and every cell and corpuscle in your body, for that matter. Because, again, our individuated mind, conscious and subconscious or unconscious, is a differentiated segment of the universal cosmic one mind. More on that in a minute. Now, when I say this is a two-way street between the conscious and unconscious, not only do we get greater conscious access to the unconscious and the flow of information from the unconscious into the, I didn't make my point about the physical. That's why you could manage blood pressure. Not to an extraordinary degree, but certainly have a temporary influence on things like blood pressure or pulse, or I talked about breathing away your hunger pains. There are a number of ways that we could influence the body's immune system with deep relaxation. Indeed, Guided imagery or visualization has been known to boost the body's immune system and enhance various therapies, such that so-called spontaneous remission of cancer has been observed even in the absence of a treatment with nothing more than guided imagery or visualization. But the problem is that it's so variable and such a function of each individual case that it's really hard to generalize. So one person gets a miracle healing, their cancer disappears, they're cancer free, no trace of it at all, and 9 other people get no result at all. And so it's hard to generalize. There is a study that just came out that eating this is a little bit of an aside, but I'll share with you. I want to go to the Q&A in just a couple of minutes. It says eating a bowl of ice cream every day reduces the chances of getting diabetes. And this has come out in several studies, but the studies are being repressed because they're so counterintuitive that nobody can believe they're valid. Why would eating more sugar uh, decrease the likelihood of getting diabetes when, everything we know about diabetes mellitus is that it's the result of the toxic nature of too much sugar. So that's the problem. We're all individuals, and there are these general things we can learn about healthcare and medicine, pharmaceuticals. We're more than a sack of chemicals. We are a sack of chemicals, a meat body, but we're conscious, and that consciousness is a factor. It's not the total story, but it's a factor. The nature of the cancer. How'd you get the cancer? Why do you have the cancer? There's hundreds of kinds of cancer, and not only many different kinds of individuals, but all of us are unique. DNA proves there's no two people with the same DNA. In a universe, I like to say, that won't even replicate snowflakes. So that pretty much rounds out what's in the unconscious. But when I say it's a two-way street, not only by relaxing and opening this valve do we lower the resistance and get a greater flow of memory and insight and understanding, the ability to influence the body's immune system from the unconscious into the consciousness. But the reverse is true. The ability of the conscious mind to plant sets of instructions, affirmations, suggestions, even commands, if you will, as seeds into the fertile unconscious mind is also greatly enhanced. So let's just take an aspect of learning. I want to learn a new language, and I have to study all these vocabulary words. And I find that it takes me, 10 repetitions of a word to actually learn it on average. I have to spell it, I have to conjugate it, I have to know the definition, I have to use it in a sentence and know its meaning. And then after 10 repetitions or so, I learn the word and I can use it easily. Becomes second nature. Well, if you did all of that in states of deep relaxation and combined it with visualization, for example, I dare say you could learn that word in 2 or 3 reps instead of 10 or 12 reps. You learn faster. Your understanding is more complete. This is the heart and soul of accelerated learning, is learning in a deeply relaxed state where there's less resistance. You're more open to change, more open to developing yourself, growing yourself. I mean, even the brain, this was determined in a series of studies that culminated in a report in 2005 that we can literally grow the size, mass, and weight of the brain at any age. Even a middle-aged adult can grow gray and white matter with mindfulness meditation. And the amygdala, the fight or flight center, will actually atrophy and reduce in size as we practice feeling safe. No surprise then that there are studies that show in reactionary people, people with, what shall I say, a hair trigger, they get easily frightened, an exaggerated amygdala, bigger. But it's it can be grown. If you're a fearful person, it will atrophy and shrink in response to meditation. That fight or flight center, that cluster of neurons in the limbic brain called the amygdala. But the gray and white matter that contributes to higher brain functions in the frontal lobes and the cortex, that can grow as you practice relaxation, ease and grace and peace of mind and the happiness that flows from that. Success does not create happiness. Peace and happiness create success. There is no way to happiness or love. Love and happiness, peace of mind is the way. So I'll leave it at that. Maybe next week we can pick up with the logical follow-on to all of this, which is that if we're talking about each individual having one mind with a consciousness, with two aspects to the consciousness of that mind, the conscious mind and the unconscious or subconscious. I didn't talk about pre-conscious. That's sort of the stage, the on-deck circle, where an awareness, an idea, an insight, an understanding comes from the unconscious into the pre-conscious just before it arrives into consciousness. I'm not going to dwell on that, but that's what pre-conscious is. You can Google that. But again, the consciousness itself is an energy or a spirit that ultimately is undifferentiated. It's unified, and it's infinite, and it's eternal, and it's the essence of what people personify as a sky god, a man on a cloud. But it's much more sophisticated than that, much more complex than that, and can be experienced and understood. This is the ramp to it. This is the approach to it. So, yeah, maybe we can pick up on that next week. I'll do a little more study and think more about how we can bridge ourselves from understanding the human mind to the fact that we're all elements or fragments of one cosmic mind. And that's our ultimate identity. Yeah, stay tuned. Okay, Melinda, it's about 12 after. Do we have some questions that I can respond to or some comments that we can benefit from?
We do have Ignacio has an interesting question. I just want you to elaborate a little bit. I've asked you this before we get to this question on your certainty of the one mind. I find that idea very comforting, and yet sometimes I don't know, my scientific mind says, really? If you had anything else to say about that.
Yeah, you mean in a universal,
Correct.
absolute, all-inclusive sense of ultimate reality, that certainty?
Yes, you personally, I know I've asked you this, that you've arrived at, you don't wonder, you know that there is that overarching source of oneness, is it?
It sounds arrogant to say I know. So, at the risk of sounding conceited or pompous or arrogant, my knowing, in air quotes, I would say is a result of three things, maybe four. One is studying theology, philosophy, psychology, sociology, anthropology, and the consensus of people who have explored the longing of their heart to find connection. And there are countless books and essays and letters and documents. Some of them became religions. What is Christianity but letters and documents and essays written 100 years and more after Christ's death? Christ never wrote anything down. Moses did. Moses wrote 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the so-called pen. He wrote stuff down. Christ never wrote anything down. Buddha never wrote anything down. And in the case of Buddhism, they were oral traditions. But even with Christ, it was the oldest gospel was written about 70 years after he died. So it's all sort of hearsay. And then when Constantine tried to put a church together, he only pulled 4 of the books out of the Apocrypha. There's another 50 or 60 so-called books that he could have put in there that he had burned and destroyed, except we found some in Nag Hammadi in the 1940s, 1947. The year I was born, they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh my God, here's a whole nother take on Christianity. Well, Christians aren't interested because the books that got burned are a very different approach to Christianity. It's very personal, very mystical. Constantine chose the 4 books that he did because his purpose in building a church in the 3rd century was to create a state, to build an army. The church was the state for 1,000 years after that. So reading all of these documents, studying scripture, studying all these religions, but I gotta quickly add my psychedelic experiences and meditation and mindfulness. So those 4 things, meditation, mindfulness, psychedelics, and the study of scripture and ancient documents and the consensus that people have arrived at by pursuing this divine homesickness, this longing that we all have to be part of something more. We all feel disconnected. Well, if we all feel disconnected, then maybe we are disconnected. And much of our lives is spent reaching out for contact. I mean, just holding hands is sweet, not just as a teenager, but no matter what age you are, to hold hands. Or if somebody hands a baby to you, my God, Or what do we do with animals? We pet them. They're called pets. We touch them. We're so in need of connection. Hug a tree. Put flowers in your house. What are we trying to do? Get home again. Chickadee jig. Home again, home again. So there's some unification here. There is some unity ultimately. The universe itself is a reference to one thing, one thing spinning around. And awareness or consciousness, I think, love, these are the best words we have for it. And so it's more of a personal experience combined with what I've read that brings me that confidence and that faith and diminishes my fear of death, turns it rather into a great adventure.
Very helpful. Thank you. Ignacio wants to chime in. How do we know the right partner has arrived in our life, Michael? I'd appreciate any insights.
Well, I think that's
Go ahead.
I think that's a moment to moment and day to day thing. The right partner may be the right partner for a week or a month or a year. They might be the right partner for 10 years and then no longer the right partner. So I'm not sure what to say about that. I think we're all soulmates, um, maybe some more than others. There is this concept in mysticism that between the one, divinity, and the multiplicity, the world of separated forms, is a group, and that the soul lives in groups or families or ashrams, houses of the holy, on its own plane above and free of form. And when we encounter someone in our physical lives that we feel a particular affinity with, and sometimes it's very immediate. You have a conversation with somebody and it feels like you've known them all your life. There's just, when I think of all of my friendships, whether they're business or romantic or just, platonic friendships, they're so varied and different in the way they resonate with me that it just sort of supports my idea that we've known each other in past lives. And I don't know, there may be 100 people in our lives or 1,000 people in our lives that we have these karmic relationships with. And if we happen to fall in love with one and have a romantic affair, uh, get married, start a family, whatever, well, it doesn't mean that the nature of that relationship isn't going to change. Um, Somebody asked Christ why he was not rigidly opposed to divorce, as many of the Jewish leaders in his time and before were. And he said, because you're too hard hearted. And he's basically saying it's understandable that you're not going to be able to tolerate each other forever. You're changing. Everything is in flux, and you're not the person you were when I met you. Well, neither are you. Why would we think we are? Some people grow closer. Some people grow apart. Some people stay pretty much parallel. So you got to go with the flow. How how did he phrase that question again?
He wanted to know,
Uh,
pull it up here. He
uh,
wondered, how do we know the right partner has arrived in our life?
to answer it in a different way, uh, because you think about nothing else. You forget to eat. You forget to sleep. You walk on clouds. Uh, you feel ecstatic, totally stoked. Um, that's falling in love. You know, you trust those feelings, but again, they don't all work out. They don't all work out. And again, all of my examples are too personal to share, so I'm not going to share any. But I think we all know what I'm talking about. So they may be the right person for now. Good. If you have a month together, a week together, a year together, a decade together, fine. And if you need to separate, do it in a loving and graceful and elegant way. Because once you love someone, you will always love that person, no matter how badly they treat you or how they may betray you. They could turn out to be a serial murderer and in prison for the rest of their lives, and some part of you will always love them. The most abused children in the world who are tortured by their parents still have a loving bond and a connection to them. It's a pretty contradictory and paradoxical uh, concept, that this nature of the way we are connected, the way we bond to our parents, even if you don't like your parents, if you never liked your parents, or you don't like others in your family, and you never liked them, and you wonder, why am I in this family? I don't like any of these people. And maybe they don't like you. Well, nevertheless, there's going to be some loving bond. It's a different kind of love. Like, I don't want to hang out with you. I find you abusive. And no, I'm not going to get caught up into your abusive traps and tricks. But nevertheless, you have this ineffable bond that is difficult to explain just by virtue of the fact that you're part of that family. It's about as much as I can say about that.
Nobody else in line. I was thinking while you were talking that I know some people who have had arranged marriages, and some of them have been years and years and years of contentment.
Yeah, because you learn to love. And the nature of love changes. Um, I will speak about this, the nature of the I don't see any reason not to say that the nature of my love, and I think I can speak for Doreen as well, the nature of our love has changed remarkably in the 30 plus years that we've been exclusive to each other. Which is, pretty much from the beginning when we first met. Doreen sort of laid down the law. Um, but we didn't marry for 6 years. But after all these years, 30 some years now, 28 years married, the nature of the love is so profoundly different. It's more like you become one person. The you or me becomes a you and me. We still disagree. We're still different people. We have different tastes and even to some degree different values. We inform each other, we teach each other, but still we each grant the other one the right to be who they are and individual. There still is an element of that, but it fades. The distinctions give way to a blending or a bonding that speaks to the whole idea of evolving as spiritual beings. I think marriage is you know, I've only been married once and I was 47 years old. So I was single for a long time. I really loved being single. Um, Irresponsible, not interested in kids, selfish with my life and my career, very self-centered. But came to a point where, as I matured, I would say into my late 30s, I started realizing this was not really fulfilling. This was a young person's lifestyle, and I felt a need to find a companion who would stand beside me and not behind me. And that's when I started considering looking for somebody who was powerful. And I think I had always chosen relationships that I could manage, that I could handle, out of my fear that I'd end up in a relationship like my parents. So I was choosing relatively speaking, weak people to be with. And I wasn't conscious of it. But in retrospect, I think that's what I was doing. Doreen was having none of that. So she was always her own person and always was willing to tell me. And I liked that. But at the same time, there is this merging. And again, in other relationships, it may go the other way. The inevitable change and flux might cause people to, as they say, grow apart. And if we can do that elegantly and gracefully, there's no reason that we can't have a spiritual divorce or a sacred separation and continue to treat each other with love and kindness and patience, tolerance, generosity, forgiveness. We just don't want to hang out. We just don't want to share a household. So I think there'll always be marriage. I don't think as humanity evolves, we're going to do away with marriage because of that spiritual component. For those who do find the right person, it is what shall I say, a training ground for the whole spiritual act of shedding the individual part of ourselves and becoming one with all things. Ultimately, we are not the drop, we are the ocean. So I'll leave it at that. I find it odd nobody has a question about the conscious versus a subconscious mind. That seems so intriguing to me. This is the heart and soul of hypnosis and meditation and all these closed eye processes. Why do we do this? What is this shift? It's relaxation promotes the integration of the conscious and subconscious. We become, or unconscious, we become more conscious and more aware. And I think that's a beautiful model. So even if we're not generating questions, I know you must have some in your mind. Reflect on that, consider that. And anytime you want to understand something or remember something or solve a problem or set a goal, don't try harder. Take a breath, close your eyes, breathe, feel the letting go, and wait for it to come to you. Don't chase it. Logic and analysis and reasoning has its place. Balance your checkbook, solve the math problems, do your calculus and your trigonometry. But when it comes to mastering the mind, the mental arts, creativity, imagination, insight, understanding, comprehension, did I say memory, recall, these are all relaxation skills. Breathe, relax, let go, let it come to you. Try that tip of the tongue trick. Oh, I'll remember in a minute. And then continue the conversation. And I should do a class on memory. There's such a thing as remembering to remember. I used to teach a technique called remembering to remember. How do I remember to remember? I have some tools for that. And memory pegs, and we can even do memory pegs one day. I can teach a person to memorize, a list of 30 is usually what I teach. A list of 30 items in about 30 or 40 minutes. Teach you the memory pegs that you use over and over. I've used them for 40 years. And the same pegs, same memory pegs. And you just, whatever you want to remember, put in this memory peg, which is a crazy picture. That's the secret to it. You make a crazy picture in your head. So the number one is always the same crazy picture, and whatever you want to remember, you put it in that picture. Number two is always another crazy picture, and that's what you memorize initially. But then whatever you want to remember, you put it in that crazy picture, and it's so much easier. That's how all the great memory experts work. Crazy pictures. So much easier to remember.
Nora Alicia wants to add that she would love a class on memory.
Good. Well, I'll remember to do it. I promise. All right, gang. Let's wrap it up. Thank you very much for being here. Mahalo, aloha, namaste, and salam. So value your presence every Sunday. Join us whenever you can. I'd like you to unmute, say goodbye to your neighbors. Hello, thank them, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Michael.
Have a wonderful
very
day.
much.
Thank you, Michael.
Happy to be here as
Thank
always.
you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Well,
I'll
Have a
look
great-
forward to watching this one again. Thank you.
Good, good, good. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks, Michael. My condolences again. I'm
To
passing
Roy.
it.
Yeah,
Roy,
And
yeah.
sure he's doing fine.
Yeah.
Okay, folks. Bye.